physics science video. Anyway, yeah, I don't know what to go with that. This is going to be about what I've written so far, just an explanation of it. More information just regarding what I'm trying to say and how difficult it is, why I am finding it difficult to say it. It's a different kind of writing than what I'm used to, I guess. But anyway, doesn't really matter. And I do want this to be like a progressive, finding the best way to explain, you know, this entire thing called the universe. And it's just sort of interesting going through it and trying to figure out what the progression of is, the progression of importance, or the progression of structure that needs to be understood before the next structure can be understood. You know, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, let's just get to it. And you know, I plan on augmenting the writing in some sort of kind of, you know, internet kind of way, with links to more information on what a word means. Sort of links to these kinds of videos that will explain in more detail something like the word kinetic, because you could talk a lot about kinetic. It really is an interesting concept. Anyway, the universe is in substance just made of one thing. Let's call them quantons. So that's the word I've decided to use. And yeah, so it's like a new quantum mechanics that are always moving at the speed of light and have no other property beyond an orientation of polarization. So the argument is that there is a fundamental atom, a fundamental bit, a domino, a checker, and there's a checkerboard, and that's it. It's a really, really simple mechanism at its core, and the complexity is just a complexity of arrangement. Get to that. These quantons are as dense in number as your imagination can imagine, as they fill space, matter, and energy, and are in essence all there is and all that is. So that's where your imagination has to begin to understand that. It's almost like I go with the fish analogy, the school of fish, and argue that there are also the pressure of the water, you could almost say, was a bunch of invisible sardines, you know, that were maintaining structure in the ocean, and that the fish themselves, when dissected, are actually the group of sardines make each fish. You know, that the fish goes deeper than our initial perception, and that the real fish, the real element, is a little deeper than initial perception, the atom. It's deeper than that. The atom is, we're already talking about systems, not things. I mean things in the discrete thing sense. When trapped in circular orbits, we call them matter. So the fundamental argument is that photons, you know, light, energy transfers that we, you know, electromagnetic transfers of energy. That's, you got to say it right. So, you know, the correct way to say it. The energy isn't the thing. The energy is its movement, is just this stuff, you know, moving with a frequency, having a period between impacts, so to speak. And then matter, all the stuff trapped in these orbits, is just these quanta, systems of them. So, you know, the nuclear bits, the proton, neutron, electron, are their own individual systems, and they're caught in a galaxy, so to speak. So you could think of it like what the solar system is to a galaxy is the proton to the atom. Alright, still up here. Okay, matter. When they arrive at a precise time interval, we call them light, photons, electromagnetic radiation. So that accounts for all the energy in the matter. So that's just one part of this field of little bits moving the speed of light. So matter really is energy, and the energy is in the form of these little bits moving the speed of light in circles. That's matter. And energy is just transferring some of those bits at a specific frequency from one place to another, from one galaxy to another. Okay. When, in their most common condition, not matter or energy, they are force and instigate through their ability to transfer directional identity all material movement, gravity, magnetism, electrical charge, and nuclear force. So this field of bits moving the speed of light, most of it isn't in the form of energy, light, photons, or matter. Most of it is the stuff holding the matter together. Or it is the photons are quanta. They're just quanta moving in a frequency. The matter is quanta. It's just quanta trapped in orbits. So it's the same thing. It's just the stuff with a pattern and the stuff without a pattern. The stuff that provides a constant chaos pressure that makes the regularity visible. So it's the field, we'll get to that, just creates a background that matter and energy is drawn out of. Something like that, condensed out of. At the real working level of the universe, the smallest bits are just kinetically banging into each other and exchanging direction. So this is where kinetically comes up first. And it's understanding like the kinetic balls, right? You have the swinging steel ball. And you have one stationary one at the base, let's say. And you instigate a reaction. And what you have in reality is just one ball moves in its period back and forth. But through this kinetic thing, it's not just one ball doing it now. It's one does half the cycle, the other does the other half, and back and forth. But it's exactly the same thing. Its reality is that this motion, this thing happened, and that's all that happened. And it doesn't really matter which thing ends up doing the thing. It's the thing that's happening, the period, the swing. And that's kinetic. It's just this pure transfer of direction. One thing has the movement, it completely transfers it without losing any time to the other thing. And the other thing just finishes going where the other thing was going. And that's the nature of kinetic, and that's why there's no heat or there's no event in what we see happening, because it's an invisible event if you don't know what's happening. There's just a ball swinging in a period. So anyway, exchange of direction. The fundamental function is that simple, and combined with the probability of pattern creation, orbits, the incredible complexity of the universe as we experience it can be filtered out of this simple function. So once, the argument's going to be, once you establish an orbit, the constant pressure of the field maintains the orbit. through this shadowing effect. And once you create a separation between two quanta, a distance, a period, and a direction, it'll never go away, theoretically, unless it gets caught up in its orbits and then can be released in some other period. But theoretically, in the field itself, that distance would travel forever, theoretically. That pattern of separation. I might get onto that in this next section. Alright, so the kinetic paradox. In the pure kinetic interaction between indestructible hard masses with a velocity, a momentum, there is created a paradox of sort in that the interaction can look either like something or nothing happened. So I've used the example of an X, and you can look at the X two ways, like the two things at the bottom went into an interaction and went right through each other and just went right on where they were going in a straight line. Or the two things interacted and catastrophically changed each other's destiny. Now the truth is, that's what they did. They catastrophically or completely exchanged directional information, and the two things have substantially changed. And that's the reality. But it can look like absolutely nothing happened. The two things just went through each other. And with the kinetic balls, the same thing is happening. You can swing two from each end into each other. They impact and swing back up again. You can see that as the two just going through each other. Or you can see that as they have a complete exchange of directional information and completely change in the opposite direction their movement, their momentum. But just as viewing it, without knowing exactly what's happening, you could have the illusion that the two things are just going through each other, especially if there was no sound or no if your view was just a little bit foggy, you just see the swinging pendulum at twice the period, twice as fast, because there's two things swinging, theoretically, in that example. Anyway, let's see, where was I? There's created a paradox. Viewed one way, the objects will have their velocities travel through each other, and the universe after the interaction will look exactly like it would have if the interaction never happened. Viewed another way, it can be understood that the masses completely interacted and exchanged their directional momentum, and the resulting universe is now substantially changed, in that the objects have individually substantially exchanged directions. So it's sort of this subjective-objective argument, but the individuals, no doubt, are substantially changed. But kind of paradoxically, the universe didn't. Two things were going somewhere, in the example of the X, and two things end up somewhere in straight lines from that position. And nothing happened, in a sense, beyond the completion of that straight line movement. So it is kind of paradoxical. Alright, so this is the new bit. From the field. Imagine a universe densely packed with countless discrete, indestructible, and virtually identical bits, all moving at constant perpetual speed, the speed of light. Understand that the bits are traveling with equal proportion in all directions, and that all collisions are perfectly kinetic. So, around me right now, surrounding all of us, are bazillions and bazillions of these little bits moving in all directions. So they're just going on all directions. And what I am is a collection of directions, the orbits. And what light is some of those things coming at specific periods, frequencies. that because of the idea of an orbit, the frequency, there's a specific period that things must show up in to be trapped in that orbit. One has to show up at exactly the right time as another one for the gravitation to be created or maintained, to be balanced. And if it isn't balanced, it won't stay in that gravity. Metaphors, something like, you can imagine something doesn't have a stable orbit, and that it can do a couple of revolutions, but it won't be able to be maintained in orbit. It'll spiral out or spiral in, but it won't be maintained. Something like that. Anyway. Alright, in all directions, all collisions are kinetic. So the idea too is just to remember is that this, even if light was traveling through this medium, well, I'll get to that later, in that they consume no extra time and completely transfer direction to what they collide with. So to understand that, that's what kinetic means. Kinetic absorbs no time, it eats no time, and completely transfers direction. So the interaction happens just as another step in the progression of the movement of something, and there's just, it's as if it didn't happen. These collisions, they just substantially change what one thing is doing for what the other thing is doing. The two things just exchange destinies entirely, but the same destiny exists overall, which is the paradox. Anyway, now imagining two more marbles at one end of the field of chaos. So you have this huge universe, and we're just going to add two marbles at one end. Imagine they are moving at the same direction towards the other end of the universe. So they're like a photon. They're separated by some distance. So that you're adding two marbles separated by a known distance, an exact distance. And they're moving that away towards the other end of the universe. Question, will they make it across the gauntlet of interaction? Will they get across the entire universe and be able to be received as two marbles, say 10 inches apart? The simple answer is no. They will get absorbed by the chaos. But the real truth is their direction and pattern, distance and separation, will travel straight across the kinetic field as if it didn't exist. So the reality is that they will go all the way across the universe, all the way across all those zillions of interactions, all those X's, all those exchanges. And the truth is the distance, the pattern, will go across the universe. At the other end of the universe, you will receive at the appropriate time interval, the speed of light. Two marbles will show up, separated by 10 inches of distance. So, after, let's see, the simple answer is no, but the real truth is the direction and pattern, distance of separation, will travel straight across the kinetic field as if it didn't exist. After sufficient time to make the crossing, the two marbles will arrive at the other end of the universe, separated by 10 inches of distance. I guess I should put the 10 inches up here somewhere, right? I think that's missing. Anyway, it just won't be the same two marbles. Yeah. So that's what photons are doing. They're just pattern of quanta. And they have nothing else, like I said, besides polarization. That's all they are. They're just little kinetic marbles, little kinetic bits, traveling the speed of light like all the other sea of quanta that we don't recognize, that we don't see. And so that's what needs to be understood, is that we only can recognize or capture or see, interact with in some significant way, things that interact with the orbiting quanta, because the orbiting quanta are the ones that distort time. They're the ones that change the idea of moving from one place to another place at the speed of light. That's what stops things from going from one place to another place at the speed of light, is the fact that it gets lost in this orbit thing for 10 minutes or 10 billion years, just depending on the circumstance. And that their direction now too becomes not the exchange can take place over a very long period of time, so a lot of interactions can be built into their direction, so they can have billions of interactions while they do that orbiting, and have done billions of little X's where direction has been changed. And so a pattern of separation of 10 inches, let's say, between marbles, if it interacts with a orbit, gets captured by it, the 10-inch pattern is still the 10-inch pattern, but now it's trapped, and it can be released in any direction, theoretically, depending on how much time goes by. But the pattern, and so the distance of separation and the direction of those two marbles can now be altered because of the function of the time dilation that takes place once you orbit, once you trap this quanta in an orbit. I don't know if I said that as well as I need to. Alright, so the next bit is going to be to imagine this chaos field as a pressure, and that two bodies can be interacting. One comes this way, one comes this way, and they have a distance that's different than the distance of going the same way and having a period. But they have a separation of distance that makes it possible that they end up shielding each other from the interactions, from X's. So they end up getting hit more from one end than they do the other end. And if you're talking about a million interactions, it's like thinking about a million coin tosses. You're going to end up with a very high, probably, the 50-50 thing is going to reveal itself in to a high degree of precision. The real probability will be felt as an almost explicit, so the probability will almost be turned into an explicit probability of directional movement. The pressure a slight difference in pressure will become very precise in terms of its effect. And this is the nature of gravity. This is what captures things. Now, the trick is I can't just explain it as these two things being opposite each other, spinning because of pressure. They're blocking because the speed of light, the speed of the quanta producing the pressure, ends up changing where the gravity is, where the shadow ends up being cast. Because ironically, it takes more time to go around the circumference of the circle than it takes to go across the diameter of the circle. So the gravity is traveling the diameter, where the object is traveling the circumference. And so there's a time difference. So there has to be a modification of position to be reflective of the fact that it takes time for the shadow to get from one side to the other side. The diameter takes time to traverse. And so the two things can't be exactly opposite each other, because that would only work if it was instantaneous. So why there isn't more matter in the universe is, I think, answered by this dilemma that what has to happen is there actually has to be some multiple of quanta in arrangement to each other. It can't just be 2. It's got to be 4 or 8 or some specific number that actually end up gravitationally tying to each other. So set A, and you could say set B of objects, one of set A's objects gravitationally links to one of set B's, and one of set B's gravitational objects links to the other leg of set A, because they have a distortion in their pattern. It's off center, to compensate for the fact that gravity is going to be a little slow in getting there, and so the lag will be captured by the other entity. So I haven't figured out the math on this one yet. Have to do a lot of pieing to figure out how much of a percentage of a circumference of a circle can be traveled, and how much time it takes to get across a diameter, and how many objects you would need to fill all the gravitational spots and have them circularly tie into each other, and that you don't have any remainder gravity and you don't have any under gravity. So anyway, so I'd like it to be simple, but it isn't as simple as I would like it to be. But it also explains why matter just doesn't create all the time, because if all it required was 2 things to go next to each other to end up gravitationally turning into a spiral, then there'd be matter all over the place. And so it requires a more special circumstance in terms of this pressure field for matter to be created, for there to be an orbit created that's maintained once it exists. Like the pattern of the separation of the 2 marbles, the pattern of an orbit is more complicated, and that pattern, though once it exists, is almost easier to maintain in the chaos than not maintained. It becomes kind of indestructible unless there's some powerful irregularity, some regularity, ironically. Some new pattern has to be strong enough to create enough disruption in the chaos. The perfect pressure has to somehow be disproportional pressure to break the orbit once the orbit is correct. Alright. So I just don't know. It's, I'm putting this into some sort of words that, people who don't understand physics, don't understand some of this language, is going to be a little difficult. That's why I'm having a difficulty writing it. Because you can't just turn it into a cartoon. But it also doesn't need to be turned into unimaginable abstract math. I mean, that's the whole point here, is that it is imaginable. You can just imagine it as marbles. And if you understand what kinetic means, and you understand that there's something that happened in the process of the Big Bang. I mean, determinists sort of understand some of this, in the sense that they understand that there's a history to my atoms. There's a history to the energy, the movement of the bits that make up those atoms. That it all has a history, and that somewhere in that history, certain pattern was obliged to form. There was something that created this attraction force that we think of it as, that pushed the bits together, is the more accurate way to say it, that forced me to consolidate out of what seemed like chaos. And that force has to be some kind of pressure, some sort of other pressure, some sort of other circumstance. So I would argue that something like the density of the, the field pressure inside of a sun or something is where this matter thing gets created. Or you could argue that it's in the Big Bang itself there was a crust, and that the crust of the thing that exploded created a reflective surface that causes the irregular, that causes the probabilistic 1 in a million, but you're doing a zillion experiments, so 1 in a million is a lot, times where you would end up having these 4 things in correct association, where they would end up trapping each other in an orbit through shadowing from this pressure. Okay, yeah, well, as good as I can do for now. Anyway, I'm trying to explain how this kinetic thing is just such the answer. I mean, it just explains this whole idea that it's all the same stuff. Matter, energy, and force is all made out of these same things, the same little bits. And it's just the little bits doing slightly different things. And I say the slight difference between the quanta pushing me into the earth, creating gravity, literally pushing me, not pushing, no, it's not literally pushing me, exchanging directional, kinetically balling me, okay, towards the earth. Doesn't sound quite right. Anyway, that force is the same as the, I kind of lost my train of thought. It's all the same stuff. The matter and the bits, they're all the same marbles. They're just marbles in just this subtle different configuration. So again, the light, the energy thing, with the thing we measure as energy, is just marbles that can be captured and exchanged between orbitals, and the orbitals are a collection of these orbits. Ends up being this, I mean, we're kind of like just a delay in time. We're just quanta trapped, and that's why we can see us, because we're a pattern that's different than the field. We have a regularity and a consistency that the field doesn't have, and so we're just like red, like say the whole universe is made out of just these blue sardines. We're now visibly red sardines as a pattern inside the field, but we're exactly the same stuff. We're just moving inside of it, so it's like the eddy in the stream or some other thing. We're just a pattern of the movement. The movement isn't just going from here in a straight line to there anymore, because it's caught in these orbits, and that's all we are. We're just bent straight lines, and that's what makes us visible. That's what makes us seem like something. And the fact of our substance, the impenetrability of us, is because the rest of the field becomes that borderline between regularity and irregularity, between trapped and not trapped, that just creates the border, the trap. That's a good way to say that. Well, anyway, but this is it. This is reality. This explains it all. It's all in there. You don't have to have magical attraction and repulsion anymore. It's not magical. It's clearly just a transfer of directional information. There's more stuff moving in a direction. That direction will be transferred to the thing it interacts with. Direction is what's being transferred between everything. Direction, this is what we're doing. Matter changes directions. It moves through the field, and it moves through the field because its arrangement has a deficit. It has a surplus. It has directionality already caught up in it, and it has some sort of balance or imbalance. So again, we're back to the orbit, and it just stays where it stays if it's perfect. But anything that makes it irregular, and it'll start wandering off in a direction. And the irregularity is just it's just extra marbles going one way, then marbles going the other way, in the totality of its net systems. Alright, yeah, well, I don't know if this video is going to help at all, but I don't know. We'll have to see. So anyway, see how it goes. I mean, I don't dislike how I've written this so far, but I just know this isn't, it's going too slow first off, and it just might not be. It's simplistic, but it might not be simplistic enough. But you can't make it too simplistic. Like I said, this is the paradox of it. I can't just say there's a shadow. The shadow creates a less pressure between things, which ends up pushing things together. This is just not entirely accurate because of this complexity of the speed of the pressure. It's not instantaneous. But that's the greatness of this in terms of that's the great advantage. That's a great incidental fact of this thing, is that this explains why force does move at the speed of light. Because it is part of the stuff. It's stuff. It's not nothing. It's something. The force is something. And it's something just as substantial as the energy in the matter. We just can't see it. Because it has a different pattern. Which is no pattern. But anyway, okay. Enough. I'll quit fighting with it. Just try to get more done.